So the SEC typically shines during postseason play, and during the offseason, this is National Signing Day when the SEC shows its muscle once again. Top recruiting classes, top to bottom, all over the place, sprinkled through the top 10, the top 20, and beyond here in the SEC. This is SEC Breakdown. We come your way usually on Thursday night, but hey, got to do it up big for National Signing Day 2016 with David Waters from SEC Breakdown, of course. In your lower right, it's Mike Laval from Last Word on Sports, and special guest tonight, bring in William Gunter, helping us out with South Carolina as well from Fox Sports Radio. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad you guys have me. It looks like a lot of fun.
Definitely. We like to mix it up again. We just started this a couple weeks ago on Thursday nights, and we try to get on here as much as possible. So please join us at SEC Breakdown on Twitter. So, Will, you're the guest. We're going to start with you. We're going to talk about whatever caught your attention today around the SEC. Bama certainly took a jolt up the rankings throughout the day.
Obviously, a lot of talk going into Tuesday, going into yesterday about how the run of number one recruiting classes would come to an end for Nick Saban in Alabama. I think depending on which ranking you looked at, they were number 9 yesterday, and they finished number 1 today. And obviously, a massive day for Nick Saban. But I mean, let's not pretend like this isn't the first time that's happened. Nick Saban's one of the best closers in the games. The facilities that they have, the tradition, everything is there that opens the doors for Alabama to pull in big-time recruits, and that's precisely what happened starting around 8 a.m. this morning, and they go from number 9 all the way up to number 1 again, depending on where you want to look at.
So the numbers run this way for Bama: 24 signees, 3 5-stars, 14 4-stars, 7 3-stars. LSU dropped from 1. They were pretty much 1 across the board starting the day to, wow, number 3. So still a lofty class for the LSU Tigers. Ole Miss making some moves today as well, finishing with 24 commits. Georgia and Auburn in the top 10 as well. Florida just on the cusp in looking at 24/7 ESPN rivals, wherever you want to go for your service. David, in tracking things throughout the day, what really stood out for you?
I'm going to go Kirby Smart in Georgia. I think it's rare that he has a situation where he follows a school where, they fired a winning coach. And that doesn't happen too often. So I think he was able to walk into a great situation and really just kind of take over from what Rick was doing and bring in some pieces that maybe Rick couldn't have brought in. I think, he with his name recognition and with being able to hang on to Eason early in the process, I think that kind of just set the bar for Georgia and was able in just let them and help him able just to bring in more guys. And, it may be his first rodeo as head coach, but, he's been the name under Saban for a little while. And I think it's just I was really impressed that, he was able to just bring in, a couple more 5-stars behind Eason. And what he did today was, bringing in Hardman and just a couple other guys. I really like what Kirby Smart's doing at Georgia. And I want to see how he follows it up next year, but we'll concentrate on this year.
Mike, 9 classes in the top 25 according to 24/7. The other 2 services are pretty much right there. Your thoughts as you review the SEC across the board?
Mark, I thought to echo Will, Alabama did really well. Here's what I was impressed with about Alabama. Their defense got stronger after Kirby Smart left for Georgia. I think a lot of people thought Kirby Smart was going to hurt Alabama's recruiting. If you look at that defensive line and the linebackers they brought in today, a couple of those guys they brought in after Kirby Smart leaves Alabama. So impressed with their consistency today. The other 2 teams I was impressed with, LSU and Ole Miss. And here's why. Some instability in those programs. Ole Miss is facing things, we don't know the depth of that, but the release of that information last weekend would create some instability, particularly for those guys who are committing today, which are usually your 5-stars. And LSU with the Les Miles drama last year, for him to maintain a top 5 class with very little job security from the athletic director at LSU, I thought was pretty impressive. For those 2 schools to be as high as they were, considering the instability.
Hey, Will, Steve Spurrier used to joke about it. I don't know if Will Muschamp's in the joking mood about it when you're 26th in the nation and 10th in the SEC, but considering what the height of the class at South Carolina looked like just about a month ago, pretty big strides out of Will Muschamp and company.
Yeah, you think about what they were able to do flipping Keel Pollard from Arkansas late in the process, obviously landing Stephen Taylor, which is going to be the bell cow of the class, getting him away from Florida State and Texas. I think, you look at it, though, let's be honest, it's the SEC. You're going to pull in good classes. I go back to David's point about Georgia. Um, I think the four of us could go to Georgia and recruit a top 5 class. The SEC is going to attract really, really good players, and Muschamp did that. But you look at some of the guys he pulled away. I think that the impressive guys are Evan Henson, getting him out of Florida, getting him away from Southern Cal. Again, Pollard, Stephen Taylor. But then there's also some guys that they're going to have to hope that they hit on that are great evaluations. Dennis Wonin out of Georgia comes to mind. Chavis Dawkins from South Carolina out of nationally renowned Burns High School. It's a good class, but it's going to be evaluations. And I've talked about that ad nauseum on our radio show to the effect of you can recruit really well in the SEC. You just mentioned it. 26th is a good recruiting class, but it's good for 10th in the SEC. That's kind of a problem. There's 14 teams. So it comes down to your evaluations and then being able to coach them up when they arrive on campus. And that's what we're about to learn about Will Muschamp, Lance Thompson, Travaris Robinson, all these coaches that South Carolina's brought in. Can they coach up this class and make them equal to or better than the classes that were ahead of them in this particular cycle?
Hey, David, with Florida, it was a team that really overachieved early in the season, pulled off the shocker against Ole Miss, beat Tennessee. But we saw throughout the season, as the season wore on against the better teams down the stretch, when you look at Alabama, Florida State, and Michigan, the offensive line woes came to fruition, quarterback situation outside of Antonio Callaway, even though Demarcus Robinson was there, he had his issues. Playmakers an issue. And then going into 2016, despite the big defense that's in place there with the Gators, they lose some key pieces. Do you think Jim McElwain addressed those issues?
I think that's what he did well. He hit his needs. Like you mentioned, the quarterback position after Will Grier got suspended, put in Treon Harris, not the great fit for Jim McElwain's style of offense. So now, he goes in, he gets Felipe Franks, who, is the prototypical, 6'5" quarterback who can just sit in the pocket and wing it. I don't expect him to come in. He's probably going to be redshirted, but he's going to be given every opportunity to earn the job. But I do look for Luke Del Rio or Austin Appleby to get that job. But it will benefit him to sit and learn from McElwain and Nussmeier and go through the spring. He was an early enrollee, so he's in the weight room. He gets to go through spring practice and go to the spring game and get his feet wet just a little bit. And then, maybe hopefully, Florida under Will Muschamp in first year under McElwain, they didn't really blow a lot of teams out, and they didn't really get, backup quarterbacks a lot of experience. And maybe he can jump in and do that, or maybe get redshirted. But also, you mentioned Antonio Callaway, and the big pickup today for Florida was Tyree Cleveland out of Texas. He gives them another receiver that they probably can rely on to go opposite of Callaway and give Florida 2 deep threats, and then help the quarterbacks a little bit, whoever that is. And the big need, we joked about this when we did a Florida recruiting show earlier, is getting that kicker. It was a big hit for Florida when 2 kickers went down with ACL injuries this year, and it was a joke at times to sit there and watch that. So Florida went, and Jim McElwain went and stole one from Alabama, Eddie Pinheiro. The thing about him, though, he's never kicked in a game before. He's done competitions and he's kicking 70-yarders on videos and stuff, but how's it going to be when the lights turn on and he has to kick in the game?
Yeah, so Jim McElwain may not have to raid a grocery store for a kicker this year. That's a good thing.
Yes, very, very much so.
Mike, hopefully we can hear you. I couldn't hear you last time, but it appeared as though maybe David and Will could. Hopefully you're coming through for us here. Butch Jones, 2 top 5 recruiting classes the past 2 years. 14 is still a great showing, but Will addressed it in the context of the SEC and how difficult the competition is. Was that a bit of a downer for Tennessee fans in seeing the recruiting not quite what it was, at least statistically, not quite what it was the previous 2 seasons?
I think Tennessee fans are happy with this class. It's a good class. Here's the difference. Butch Jones is bringing in a lot fewer guys this class. If you look at all the teams in the top 10, They're bringing in 23, 25 guys in this class. Tennessee's only bringing in 21 this class. In fact, if you look at the average star rating of 2016 class for Tennessee, it's higher than the 2014 and 2015 classes for Tennessee. What Butch Jones is doing is building his program. A lot of depth. Tennessee did not lose a lot of guys over the last 2 seasons. They were a young team, 2015 or 2014 and 2015. So they don't have a lot of backfield to do. So what you're not going to see is Khalil McKenzie, Jalen Hurd, guys who are going to come in 5 stars and be on the national scene in their freshman season. But what you are seeing is a lot of depth. 5 defensive backs, including 3 4-stars, 4 wide receivers, and 2 defensive linemen. The 2 big gets were Jonathan Kongbo today and Tyler Bird. So, Vol fans are very happy with this class. It's a solid class, and it's part of Butch Jones's program building. Very, I would say, formulaic, this recruiting.
Will, I'll let you take this in whatever direction you want, but what really caught my eye, and again, it comes up every year, it's the footprint of the conference versus the other conferences. So if you're in the Big Ten, it's Ohio and Pennsylvania as kind of the spot where most of the big recruits come from. Otherwise, the Big Ten coming down to Florida, going other places to get recruits. But within the footprint, it's Ohio and Pennsylvania and New Jersey to a lesser degree. I saw this stat about the Pac-12, and this is startling if you're a Pac-12 fan. 34 of the 41 ESPN 300 recruits come from California. Out of the Pac-12 territory, 34 of the 41. It's California. Basically, if you're in the Pac-12, you got to go to California to recruit. Otherwise, you're in bad shape. And for the Big 12, it's Texas. Obviously, for just about the entire nation, it's Texas is a great spot. But specifically for the Big 12, what stands out for the SEC is it's Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana. They're all over, and the depth is just amazing.
It is. I don't know if y'all saw this. Today was actually the first time that a consensus number 1 player went outside of the SEC since Terrell Pryor did it and went to Ohio State. Rashawn Gary, obviously a Northeastern player, staying and going to Michigan. Matter of fact, Alabama not even in that final top 2. But it's a demographics thing, guy. I mean, a lot of people are moving to the South. The South as a whole is a growing population, and whether it's Florida or whether it's Georgia, you think about the amount of talent that the state of Georgia produces. You're getting a lot of your talent in the Southeast. I saw today, or I heard today, Jim Harbaugh kind of upping his stance. He's going to have a spring practice, now remember last year he went and did the camps, the satellite camps around the Southeast. We all remember that, and the discussion that it brought up and potentially new legislation. Well, Jim Harbaugh today took it a step further. They're going to go to IMG during Michigan spring break and hold a spring practice in an effort to get down to the state of Florida and continue to promote the product that is Michigan. So, everybody wants to come south, and it's just like you said, out west. If you're Oregon, if you're Washington State, if you're Oregon State, you got to go into California. I remember going back to some of those old recruiting battles when Pete Carroll really had it going. With like a guy like Herschel Dennis, and you had Oregon and Southern Cal going after a Herschel Dennis. If you're going to be successful, you have to go into California. I tell you something that shocked me today. Look at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, I think, is 40, 41, 42, somewhere in the national rankings. You would think with all that money, with that prestige, with what they've done the last few years, they would be higher and able to go into the state of Texas and maybe pull some of these kids out. But maybe with the rise of Baylor, with the way Texas Tech is doing things, that's changed the dynamics of it for like an Oklahoma State, even Oklahoma today, guys. 21st nationally in recruiting. I mean, you're talking about a team that was just in the college football playoff, usually goes into Texas, steals a primetime player or two, and we saw what happened with Charlie Strong in Texas today, having a big run. So when you talk about the demographics, it's interesting to watch the evolution of college football and to see, going back to Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, a plan, a plot, a strategy to go down to IMG and promote Michigan in an area where our country demographically is growing each and every year.
And I'll jump in and
warm temperatures, basically Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame are aberrations. They are who they are, and it'll probably stay that way as long as they're strong in the head coaching category. But otherwise, it's a real struggle for the rest of those schools. You bring up Oklahoma in the low 20s, depending on your service. where they've traditionally gone to Texas. And again, you're talking about a traditional power, a name brand that just went to the college football playoff. So it's not a downtime for Oklahoma. And this class for Oklahoma is really not an aberration. They're not vying for top 10 classes and haven't for quite some time. They're usually in that 15 to 20 range and more so in the low 20s.
Mark, and I'll jump off. I'll dive into that too.
Sure.
Just kind of extending off of what Gunter was saying. It's Florida's now holding their spring game on a Friday night, and athletic director Jeremy Foley basically came out and admitted this is strictly for recruiting. Florida's going to get a primetime slot all by themselves on ESPNU or ESPN or SEC Network, whichever it is, but they're going to have a time slot all by themselves to sit there and recruit for 3 hours on national TV. So we're seeing the game change. You mentioned Harbaugh and what he's doing and spending out at kids' houses and holding the spring practice down here in Florida. The game is changing, and it's changing fast, and these guys are getting really creative in what they're doing, and it's very fun to see. But there probably will become a point where it gets too much for some people.
Well, let me go back on
Will.
that. It's interesting. We talked a lot about that today because of the Will Muschamp effect. Having watched Steve Spurrier in Columbia for the last 11 years, it's funny to hear the fan base of South Carolina act today like this was some new epic way of recruiting. South Carolina's had good classes, even with Jadeveon Clowney and Marcus Lattimore. They're still typically around the 18 to 24 area over the last few years. But going back to what you just said, go back to the Jim Harbaugh thing with spring practice. I'll say this: I'm not a big fan of what Florida did with a Friday night spring game because, like you said, let's be honest. You can talk about recruiting, but how many high school kids are going to sit down on a Friday night and check out a spring game? And also, I think it makes it more difficult given where Gainesville is to get some recruits in on that day. We've actually talked about that a good bit. But the evolution of recruiting as a whole to the social media world, be it Facebook, be it Twitter, be it what we're using right now, be it Periscope. I was listening to Dabo Swinney for Clemson today, who I think is out in front of everybody, the way Clemson does recruiting, utilizing Periscope and social media. So to go back to the original point of the conversation, you talk about the geographics of recruiting these days. Recruiting is evolving so rapidly right in front of our eyes, whether it's Florida with their decision, whether it's Jim Harbaugh, whether it's Dabo Swinney and Clemson utilizing social media. It's really fascinating to keep an eye on and follow.
Yeah, it's not the dark ages, and we're all in tune with social media to a certain degree, but it's getting more creative with social media now, just to keep to your point, to keep ahead of everyone. So, David, is there anybody that you're really excited to see? I think once you run the numbers, we're seeing more early enrollees each and every year. So we're in more the 20 to 25% range of these classes, where the typical class is 22, 23 recruits come in, and 4, 5, up to 7. I've seen 8 guys that are going to be on campus early. So it's about a quarter of the class for most of these big schools. And so they're going to get their foot in the door. We're going to see them in spring practice. Anybody you're really excited to see?
Just as a general, SEC, just to see how they do. I'll go back to Georgia and Jacob Eason. He's going to be given every opportunity to come in as a true freshman at a big-time program, and which might really kind of be the only missing piece Georgia has. If they can find a quarterback, who knows what kind of run they can make in Kirby Smart's first year. Eason, he's going to come in with all these accolades, and will it be too much pressure on a true freshman to come in and get a job done? He comes in at 6'6", and he's now up to 230 pounds already with the weight program he's already been in at Georgia for a little while. So it's going to be interesting to see how, I think, how Kirby Smart in his first year bringing in a highly touted freshman quarterback, and does he give him the reins, or does he go with a more experienced quarterback?
Will, anybody standing out for you that you can't wait to see on a field in the fall?
I mean, some of it is what David just said with Jacob Eason, because compare the beginning tenures of Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp at Florida, and probably what set Will Muschamp back was not having a quarterback, having to rely on Jeff Driscoll, couldn't get it done. What happens if Jacob Eason is not the answer? What happens if Jacob Eason is it can't get it done. They don't have a backup. They moved Bryce Ramsey to a punter position last year. That's kind of an issue when you think about it. I love Nick Chubb, great player. They got wide receivers just falling down the stairs there. But if Jacob Eason can't get it done, all of a sudden Kirby Smart looks a whole lot like Will Muschamp. So I'm fascinated to see him roll in. And then not a freshman, but Blake Barnett at Alabama. And I'll go with David's boy, Felipe Franks, because those Gator fans, they don't like to lose. And if I'm with you, Felipe Franks, he better get things done very, very quickly. I think that's his job. And if he doesn't step in after enrolling early and coming from LSU, he doesn't step in. Jim McElwain finds the same hot seat Will Muschamp was on just 3 short years ago.
Hey, Mike, we're kind of kicking around those guys that could step on and make an immediate impact. Any guys off the top of your head?
Yeah, I'll tell you, from a Tennessee perspective, I like Nigel Warrior out of the Atlanta area in Georgia. He's a safety, which is our biggest concern. But he's a little bit bigger of a safety. Think Eric Berry with a little bit of mass, a little bit bigger. I remember Dick Carter from the NFL and Tennessee days about 20 years ago. It's his son. A very athletic player, very big. We needed. We got some skilled players in the secondary in Tennessee, but we needed a little bit of an enforcer back there. I think Nigel Warrior is a guy who can step in immediately and fill that role, particularly in a dime or nickel package. I don't know that Shea Patterson's going to get a lot of playing time early at Ole Miss, but I'm excited to see him play. I got to watch him and Jacob Eason both at the Army San Antonio, and Shea Patterson to me was very impressive. I'll be honest with you. I've had this conversation with Dave on Twitter. I was not very impressed with Jacob Eason or Felipe Franks, for that matter. But I was very impressed with Shea Patterson. He had I thought his arm was just as strong as Eason's. I thought his decision making was much better. I felt from my vantage point that he was able to read the defenses. And of course, those are pretty simple defenses in the All-Star games. But his decision making, his ability to make those decisions quickly based off what the defensive players were giving him, I thought was pretty impressive. So I'm excited to see Shea Patterson. Not sure how much playing time he's going to get next year, but I think he's going to. I think in the long run, he'll end up being better than Eason.
All right, folks, this is SEC Breakdown. We come your way typically on Thursday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time with David Waters. He's up in your left-hand corner. This is also a venture with Mike LaValle from Last Word on Sports, lower right, and also Chad Niebling from Fox Sports Arkansas. Tonight, we're bringing on a Will Gunter, who does a lot of good work for Fox Sports Radio in Columbia, South Carolina. So this is our platform, SEC Breakdown. Please join us on Twitter. And also, we're working on our website, secbreakdown.com. So, again, every Thursday night, I think we've done some damage tonight, boys. I appreciate you coming on, Will.
Oh, no problem. Glad
hey,
y'all
Mark,
had me.
You want to see if we can get Steven in right quick?
Sure. Let's jump on with Steven because he's all over Alabama, that's for sure, like nobody else.
All right. Will, thanks for joining us. We'll see if we can get Steven in here.
That'd be great.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it, man.
Hit the X. Is that?
Yeah, or I can.
You kick me out, or do I kick myself out?
Go ahead, kick yourself out. I don't want to kick you out.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, let's see. And I don't think we're going to have any luck.
Doesn't look like it's going to happen. Stephen M., if you can hear me, we'll hopefully do a hangout maybe tomorrow night. How's that sound? I can't hear you. We can't hear you or get you on, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't even see him.
Same thing with you, Mike. Tomorrow night, maybe we can find 15 minutes for a hangout.
Sure.
No, I cannot hear you at all. So hopefully everybody else could. I was just waiting for the lip smack to stop, and then I started talking every time.
No, I can hear him. It's low, but I mean I can hear him.
Okay.
So.
All right, good stuff. SEC Breakdown Thursday night for anybody watching. It'll be on the record on YouTube, and also you can follow it there on Twitter at SEC Breakdown. All right, David, I think this about wraps it up.
All righty.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah.